How did one of the turn of the century's top amateur golfers go from looking like this to looking like this in a 3-year span just from drinking some water? You may or may not have seen this photo of Eben Byers floating around the internet before. Eben with a B. And you're probably wondering how this good-looking chap ended up like this. Let me tell you, there was no gruesome accident, but from drinking what essentially was labeled as water. But more on that later, as it led to numerous other gruesome deaths like Eben's, along with major lawsuits, change in legislation, and how medicine was practiced, all due to a Harvard doctor and IBM manager. First, let's see who this good-looking chap was. Like many top amateur golfers of his day, Eben Byers was born into a very wealthy family.
I'm rich, bitch!
And his father was Alexander Byers, who was the founder of A&M Byers Company, which was the oldest and largest iron and pipe making firm in America at the time. Eben would attend numerous prestigious schools while growing up and later would attend Yale for college and golf. Once he graduated from Yale and not really needing a job desperately, he would go on to pursue his amateur golf career. Byers was known for being a bit of an erratic driver of the ball, but he was also known for having a really good putting game and pretty strong irons as well. And he would make his first appearance in the U.S. Amateur in 1990. And he would go on to win his first round. However, he would lose his second round to Finland Douglas. Again, a really 1900s name. Then again in 1901, he would have the same success as the previous year, but in 1902, he would make his first consecutive appearances in championship match, losing in a 36-hole match to Lewis James and Walter Travis in 1903, whom he had defeated in the third round the previous year. In 1904 and 1905, he had a bit less success, losing in the second and third rounds respectively. Though Eben was known to have a bit of a temper, he wasn't opposed to wrapping one of those old hickory shaft clubs around a tree from time to time, and in 1906, he would finally achieve his goal. After 6 years of trying, Byers would go on to win the 1906 championship, claiming the titles of the U.S. Top Amateur. The following year, he would... So stupid. The following year, he would defend his title but would lose in the semifinals to Jerry Trevor, who would go on to win his first of 4 career U.S. amateur titles. Byers would sadly never go on to replicate the success he had in the mid-1900s. In 1916 would be the last time he would reach the match play bracket, where he would lose to a 14-year-old by the name of Bobby Jones. And in case you aren't aware of who Bobby Jones is, he would go on to be what some consider to be the greatest amateur golfer of all time. And not only was he the first, he's the only one to have ever had a one-season Grand Slam of golf majors in a year. He would retire from amateur golf and co-found Augusta National, you know, the home of that little old tournament they have in the South called the Masters. After accomplishing all he could in the amateur game and the professional game not quite being as lucrative as it is today, he would go work for his daddy's company.
Yes, Daddy.
Though throughout the years he'd be often known as a bit of a millionaire socialite that loved to party and booze and loved the women even more.
Hey, ladies.
He would still actually go on to be very successful with daddy's money.
Yes, Daddy.
With being one of the uber rich at the time, he owned numerous luxury properties and even race stables in the UK, along with owning an entire box at Ford's Field, which was the first home of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Being the good old Yale man he was, he went to go see the big Yale vs. Harvard football game. However, the game was quite a distance from his residence, so he would take a 12-hour train ride up to the game. And after Yale won, he would again take the train back. Now, this wasn't just a normal train seat, with flights still being years away from being a common place to travel. You get a first-class train ticket that would include a sleeper bunker for his travels. With the long ride ahead of him, he'd of course take advantage of this top bunker accommodation. However, this is what would lead to the downfall and help to lead to radical changes in the Federal Trade Commission. At some point during his travels, and I'm assuming after he already had a few, he'd fall out of his bunker and straight onto his shoulder. After the shock of falling off of a bunker in his sleep, and after still dealing with quite a bit of pain in his shoulder from the accident and not really knowing what's wrong with his arm, he decided to go see his physician and explain to him what happened. And the therapist would listen to Eben and tell him about this new drug he'd been prescribing to all his patients, who had just been raving about the amazing effects of this new miracle drug that they've been taking. And this new drug, created by Harvard Dr. William J.A. Bailey, would be known as Radithor. Bailey even marketed this new drug as Radithor. It gives Superman powers. So stupid. And Bailey claimed if this new drug was simply added to water, it could cure all kinds of ailments and conditions, including mental illness, headaches, diabetes, anemia, constipation, asthma, and even could rejuvenate the happiness and useful thrills into the lives of married people whose attraction to one another had weakened. Sounds almost too good to be true. Okay, first we gotta do a little backstory on this Williams character, who would basically go on to become the godfather of radioactive quackery. Williams J.A. Bailey attended Harvard University, and during World War II, he was the wartime manager of the electronics division of IBM. And in 1918, he would be fascinated by the potential of these new materials that were being discovered at the time and their possible potential, especially those financial gains. And some of those new materials were the likes of uranium, radon, thorium, and especially radium, or as he liked to call it, radium. Oh, okay, maybe he didn't actually say that, but who knows? After messing around with these radioactive materials, he came up with a little concoction he called Radithor. See, he was rad, which was essentially radium dropped in some triple distilled water because, you gotta make sure that water's pure because you don't want contaminating your radium. So then his next step was figuring out, how do I get this new miracle drug into the hands of the masses? And he thought to himself, what's the one thing doctors enjoy more than treating their patients? Dollar bills, y'all. So he would give any doctor who prescribed this new medicine a 1/6 cut. At just under 17% commission, doctors would start prescribing this drug like gangbusters. Patients were raving about the positive effects of Radithor, the doctors' pockets were getting lined fat, and it was all coming from Bailey Radium Laboratories, which was owned by Harvard-educated doctor of medicine, Williams J.A. Bailey, who was making millions off the product, and it was only in the 1920s. Except Bailey left out one little small detail about his past. He was actually a Harvard dropout and not a doctor.
I'm a doctor, and I'm a real doctor.
That seems a little important to know. So our old mate here, Evan, would start taking a recommended dose of Radithor his doctor prescribed to him, which was just a spoonful a day. And much to his surprise, it really did actually do the trick. Being 46 at the time, he said it made him feel like he was 26 again, and your boy got his groove back. And he routinely take spoonfuls of Radithor like a good boy. However, he started noticing diminishing returns, and he started taking a little more than a spoonful a day, and again, he felt good, but again, it would stop being the case. And he figured, hey, if a few spoonfuls did the trick, shit, why not just start taking a whole bottle? So he would just make sure he started drinking a whole bottle a day, and it did the trick. And this went on for a while until he started to, once again notice it wasn't feeling all that great again. And he figured this time, let's just straight up trace that dragon, and he would start taking 3 bottles a day. I mean, he figured what could have hurt? This stuff's supposed to heal everything. And this would continue on for a total of 3 years, and it's estimated Eben drank up to 1,400 bottles of what was just basically straight up radioactive water. In 1930, Byers stopped taking Radithor, which by this time he was experiencing massive headaches, weight loss, and soon later his teeth began just falling out, and he could even start to notice his actual skull started to feel soft to the touch. And because of his fame at the time, the US government took notice into this Radithor. I mean, this would be pretty much the equivalent of a Kardashian losing a body part. Questions are getting asked. In 1931, Congress asked Byers to testify before Congress at a hearing about radioactive therapies. However, Byers was too ill to attend, but he said he would see an investigator if they came to him. So an investigator and lawyer went to see Eben at his Long Island mansion, where they were shocked by what they saw. By this time, Eben's whole lower jaw had completely fallen off, and due to the radiation wrecking his nervous system, it was reported that having his damn jaw fall off was relatively painless. Along with most all of his teeth had fallen out except for a few in the front, he had actual holes in his skull by this time. He also had countless other ailments such as severe anemia, weight loss, kidney and bone marrow failure. Shortly after giving his testimony, Eben Byers would pass away from the effects of radium from the product Radithor. Byers' death was so gruesome, along with his fame, it helped publicize the dangers of radiation therapies and medicines. Along with the combination of the Radium Girls incidents, where they basically met the same fate as Byers as a result from dipping their paintbrushes into radioactive paint and then dipping the brush into their mouth to help make a finer point to help them paint watch face dials just so they could have those little glow-in-the-dark dials that everyone thought was so cool at the time. It's a really crazy story to check out if you don't know about it. Byers' death was instrumental in the US government finally launching efforts through the Federal Trade Commission along with the Food and Drug Administration to help stamp out quack patent medicines industry and initiate product safety regulations, which ultimately gave the FDA the power they have today. The FTC would go on to issue an order against William J.A. Bailey's businesses to cease and desist from various representations therefore made by them as to the therapeutic values of Radithor and from representing that the product Radithor is harmless. However, Williams would later found the Radium Institution in New York and marketed such products such as radioactive belt clips, paperweights, and a mechanism which was purposed to make water radioactive and radioactive skincare, because having radioactive material on your skin just gives you that nice extra glow. And Williams would somehow evade any serious repercussions for his products, and by the time he passed away, he was still a millionaire in 1949 at the age of 65 from bladder cancer, presumably brought on from his use of radioactive materials. His body would be exhumed nearly 20 years later in 1965, and it was found to be ravaged by radiation. Also at this time, Eben Byers' body would also be exhumed from his lead-lined coffin by MIT physician Rob Lee Evans, and it was found that still 30 years after his death, his bones contained about 1,000 certain units. In perspective, for a normal body like yours and mine, from the sun and the food we ate, we contain about 0.2 units in our bodies. So with the radiation's long half-life, his body will still be radioactive 1,000 years from now. After accomplishing all he could and go on to replicate I already said radium. It was radon. Bang. But first, more from your local news.